Night had fallen over Waddesdon Manor. The stone towers were dark against the sky, but inside every lamp and candle burned bright. Children huddled in the long corridors, clutching blankets and stuffed bears as distant sirens wailed. An air raid siren had sounded that afternoon, but now all was quiet. Servants moved gently through the halls, guiding each child to a velvet-upholstered chair or a soft bed. One little boy peeked around a curtain. Below, the war raged on, but up here the manor felt like a world apart. A soft voice by the fireplace began to sing a lullaby. These frightened children were finding comfort in this ancient home. The grand hallways had known laughter and music once. Now they knew only hushed prayers and bedtime stories. Outside, the blackout made the countryside pitch black. Waddesdon glowed like a sanctuary beacon. For the kids evacuees from bombed London, it was as if they had stepped into a storybook castle. A little girl later whispered, "It feels like a fairy tale." The manor's massive oak doors and thick stone walls kept danger outside and peace within. It may seem incredible that one family country house could become a refuge for dozens of strangers. But long before the bombs fell, a baron had a dream on this very hill. In 1874, Baron Ferdinand de Rothschild stood on an empty field of green. He imagined a palace so grand that it would make friends from all over Europe gasp. He was a member of the famous Rothschild banking family, rich beyond measure, and he decided to use his fortune to build something no one had seen in England. Soon, construction began. Over the next 5 years, nearly 200 workmen arrived each morning. They quarried limestone, carved it by hand, and built towers and turrets in a French Renaissance style. Ferdinand named 52 rooms by color: the pink boudoir for ladies, the gray drawing room for afternoon tea, a golden gallery glittering with gilt. He even had secret doorways. A hidden door in a bookcase led to a small study. The manor he created looked like a fairy tale castle come to life. Inside Waddesdon Manor, wonder awaited at every turn. Baron Ferdinand filled his new home with treasures. Paintings by Veronese, Van Dyck, and even a Gainsborough hung on the walls. Enormous tapestries from old European palaces covered entire rooms, and the dining table was set with silver and crystal so fine it seemed to shine on its own. Ferdinand had every modern convenience: a steam engine in the basement that powered electric lights, gas for the kitchen stoves, and even a primitive central heating to warm the cold British winters. One story says Queen Victoria remarked that the porcelain plates were so shiny she wondered if ghosts did the polishing at night. The Baron also installed a telephone, the first in the countryside. In one corner stood a massive organ, and in another, a grand piano carved from golden oak. The house seemed ready for royalty before a royal had ever stepped inside. Outside, gardens bloomed under Ferdinand's care. He hired William Nesfield, a famous landscape architect, to design them. Neat hedges formed a maze for children to play in. Curving paths of gravel wound through beds of red and gold flowers. Fountains sprayed water high into the air, and a reflecting pool mirrored the sky. In the summer, lanterns floated on the lily pond, so that parties at dusk felt like dancing under the stars. Ferdinand even built a small pavilion by the nearby River Aethrope for afternoon picnics. He once collected 200 winter lilies to plant, so the garden would smell like spring all year. People whispered that Waddesdon's gardens were the most beautiful for 100 miles. When it was time to show off this work, Baron Ferdinand threw a series of grand house parties. The very first was in May 1880, even before the manor was fully finished. Fireworks burst into color above the newly laid lawns. Music and laughter poured out from the glass-roofed gallery. One guest gasped, "It is as if the stars are dancing among us." Ferdinand beamed. Before long, he held a huge opening gala in 1883. 2 special trains brought guests from London, including young aristocrats and artists. In the dining room, 12 courses were served on silver platters. Gentlemen in sharp suits tapped brandy glasses, and ladies in silk gowns sipped punch and laughed. A count from France declared, "This house will live on in stories." Indeed, it seemed the world was rediscovering England through Waddesdon's glory. Among the guests that night was Albert Edward, the Prince of Wales, later King Edward VII. He had been friends with Ferdinand since they were young. The prince danced in the ballroom and strolled in the rose garden, admiring the flowers. He liked Waddesdon so much, he named a winning racehorse after it and joked, "Ferdinand has built for himself a kingdom here." Portraits of the prince were later hung in the gallery. He even wrote, "Ferdinand, I shall return, my friend, as long as your lights burn." Other notables followed. Writers, artists, even diplomats, all drawn to the manor's magic. Then came 1890, a year that would make history. Queen Victoria, the monarch herself, sent word that she would visit Waddesdon Manor. The world watched as a simple country estate prepared for a queen. Servants polished the silver until it blinded. Flowers were arranged in crystal vases, and the gardens were swept smooth as mirrors. The queen arrived one sunny afternoon, wearing her famous white lace and a small crown, and Ferdinand bowed deeply. He escorted her inside, where she immediately marveled at the electric lights. Standing in a drawing room with every lamp suddenly glowing, Queen Victoria said, "What sorcery is this?" And Ferdinand explained with a smile, "Steam and wire, Your Majesty." The queen was delighted. She even asked for just one of the lights to be turned off and on again, watching the sparks dance like magic. After the tour, Queen Victoria walked in the rose garden, but near the fountain, she stepped off the path and crushed a bed of dahlias. Suddenly, Miss Alice, the sister of the Baron who loved her gardens, appeared. She looked at the queen and simply said, "Your Majesty, you have trod on my flowers." For an instant, all was frozen. The queen quickly bent and apologized, bending to pick the crushed blooms. Then both women laughed. The king later jokingly called Alice the all-powerful one, to her amusement. That visit made headlines around the world and proved that even royalty marveled at Waddesdon's wonder. News of Waddesdon's grandeur spread far. Society magazines gossiped about the lavish parties and stunning architecture. Ladies in London tried to copy the garden fashions they saw. When Baron Ferdinand later became a member of Parliament for Aylesbury, his critics chuckled that he had already built a palace with a foreign name and nothing left to conquer. But he answered, "One house may teach more than 100 speeches." For all his fame, Ferdinand remained a patron of the arts. He collected fountains of water lilies, statues of Greek gods, and even a rare collection of Gothic tapestries. To the outside world, Waddesdon was a shining house of light and taste, a crown jewel of England's countryside. Yet the candle's flame was not eternal. In April of 1898, Baron Ferdinand fell ill. He had poured his heart into Waddesdon for decades, and at 59, his body grew weary. One quiet morning, he passed away in London. Across England, people mourned. Shops closed and flags flew at half-mast in the capital. At Waddesdon, The great wooden gates stood locked for 3 days. The servants, who loved their master, polished his portrait by lamplight and whispered prayers. Queen Victoria sent a note of condolence. Outside, a gentle breeze scattered petals over the flower beds. It felt as if the manor itself was grieving the loss of its builder. The question then became, who would keep Waddesdon alive? It passed to Ferdinand's sister, Alice Charlotte Rothschild, everyone's Miss Alice. She was in her 50s, dignified and determined. Alice had lived a quiet life after her younger years were spent largely abroad. She had never married. When she learned of her brother's death, she immediately promised on his grave, "This house will not fall into ruin." In 1898, she walked through Waddesdon's empty halls wearing a simple black dress. Lady Alice was petite, but formidable. She placed a single white rose on Ferdinand's portrait and set about safeguarding his legacy. Alice quickly made Waddesdon her own. She ordered new decorations and continued the collection. Where a tapestry threadbare, she replaced it. Where a chair was missing, she acquired a better one. She added more suits of armor to the corridor. One such suit was said to have belonged to King Henry VIII. She told the butler and maids, "Every detail matters," and they agreed. However, Alice was nothing like her brother when it came to parties. She disliked big celebrations. Instead, she closed the house during winters and tended to its upkeep. At night, she often sat in Ferdinand's library by the fireplace, reading by lamplight, keeping watch. Staff remembered that if anything was out of place, Alice would find it herself and quietly corrected a testament to her dedication. When World War I began in 1914, Alice felt duty deeply. Though the manor itself was far from the battlefields, she repurposed it to support the war. The vast rose garden, once full of fragrance, was plowed under and planted with vegetables. Potatoes, carrots, and cabbages sprouted where roses had been. The harvest fed soldiers at the front and the hungry at home. In the great kitchen, Mrs. Beaton, the old cook, made soup each morning for local families. Alice donated large sums to military hospitals and sent care packages to French orphans. She even installed a small infirmary wing in the house itself, sewing bandages by day. Waddesdon Manor, which had hosted joyful parties, now held hope for many. Inside, there were no dances or concerts for years. Instead, the manor offered shelter and healing. Wounded officers on leave were invited for tea on the terrace, an umbrella in hand, and a maimed arm relaxed on a chair. A nurse from a nearby hospital recalled being led through Waddesdon's halls and almost weeping at its quiet beauty. Alice would often stand by the dining room window, listening to letters being read aloud, some with good news, some with sorrow. She quietly closed any letter that carried bad news and lit an extra candle for the bearer of the good news. Through it all, she remained composed. Once, a soldier said, "My lady, your house is like heaven on earth," and she replied only, "It is the people who make it so." When the guns finally fell silent in 1918, Alice allowed herself a small celebration. She invited local villagers for a modest picnic on the lawn. A gramophone played Land of Hope and Glory, and they raised glasses of bubbly ale. But Alice also knew the world had changed. She had no children of her own to inherit Waddesdon. In her final days, she summoned her great-nephew James to her bedside. "Promise me," she said in a whisper, "you will not sell this house." James, who by then had returned to England, took her hand. "I promise," he answered. That year, Alice Charlotte von Rothschild died quietly in her sleep. She had kept her promise to Ferdinand, and in doing so, became the keeper of one last vow. James Armand Edmund de Rothschild was ready to take the torch. He arrived at Waddesdon Manor in 1924 with his wife Dorothy by his side. James was a gentle, worldly man in his mid-40s. He had a full beard and twinkling eyes. Dorothy Mathilde, 17 years younger, had auburn hair and an eager smile. Together, they stepped into the familiar halls. Servants who had known Alice lined up to greet them. James simply said, "We will care for this house as if it were our family." Dorothy wiped a bit of dust off a banister. Later, she whispered to James, "Waddesdon will have stories again." And he nodded in agreement. James brought with him a lifetime of experience. He had fought in World War I, first riding with the French cavalry, then winning a Distinguished Conduct Medal with the British Jewish Legion in Palestine. There he had seen soldiers pray at sunset and villagers rebuild after conflict. Dorothy had been a volunteer nurse on that front, administering medicine to the wounded. These experiences shaped them. Coming to Waddesdon, they felt it was a refuge not only for them, but for all who came. They restored the library by adding his family's French books and kept the English classics Alice loved. Dorothy arranged Ferdinand's paintings with fresh flowers, and James hung a portrait of Evelina, Ferdinand's beloved late wife, so she would watch over it. In the summers, James and Dorothy made the manor their lively home. Dorothy wore tailored tea dresses and worked in the kitchen sometimes, surprising the chef. She laughed and said she just could not help herself as she polished the silver service. James rode horses around the estate and greeted the staff by name. They invited friends and neighbors for simple teas. School children came for tours. One teacher later wrote, "The drawing room was set out like a classroom. We learned history right between the tapestries." The manor resonated with laughter and learning once more, not with the grand balls of old, but with music recitals, art exhibits, and lively discussions. Waddesdon became a clubhouse of ideas as well. James, now a member of Parliament for the Isle of Ely, often invited scholars and politicians to stay. Dorothy organized quiet art evenings where guests would sketch together under the palm trees in the conservatory. They even hosted foreign diplomats for country house dinners in the oak-paneled dining room. In 1928, they went a step further. James arranged for a political rally on the front lawn. Hundreds of banners fluttered. Thousands of people from nearby towns came to listen. Dorothy ran a small refreshment tent. She made iced tea and lemonade for the crowd. On stage stood David Lloyd George, the great liberal leader, who spoke about progress after the war. The newspaper headline the next day read, "Politics Goes Country." Afterwards, as the guests strolled by the fountain, one elderly gentleman told James, "Your house has never been happier." Dorothy squeezed James' hand and said quietly, "We have kept the promise." Even while entertaining politicians and scholars, James and Dorothy never forgot their roots and causes. James' father, Edmund of Paris, had been known as the father of the Yishuv for his work in Palestine. The son continued this legacy. The couple quietly invited leaders like Chaim Weizmann to stay at Waddesdon. In the silent gallery, Dorothy once stood with Weizmann, looking at a map of the Middle East. He said, "Mrs. Rothschild, you give me faith." She answered simply, "We believe." That faith was reflected in history. In 1917, Britain had written a famous letter, the Balfour Declaration, addressed to Lord Rothschild and promising a homeland for Jews in Palestine. James and Dorothy had long worked behind the scenes to uphold such promises. Dorothy even traveled to the young Jewish settlements and arranged shipments of books and seed corn. In 1966, she became the first woman president of the Zionist organization, but she rarely mentioned it, saying she was only a small link in a great chain of history. Life at Waddesdon in the 1930s was busy and optimistic. James worked in Parliament until 1945, talking of education and tolerance. Dorothy campaigned for refugee children from Europe. They never forgot Ferdinand's gift. James wrote, "We must use our power to create and protect." Dorothy would say, "Each person's help, no matter how small, is worth a world." By 1939, they had agreed. Waddesdon's enormous home and land would open as a sanctuary if war came. When World War II began in 1939, James and Dorothy did not hesitate. They offered Waddesdon to the government as a refuge. In late October, the first children arrived by bus. The Manor staff had prepared. The drawing room became a nursery. The gold dining china was carefully wrapped and stored, and cots were set up under the chandeliers. Dozens of children from London, some still in their pajamas, came stumbling into these grand halls. Their teachers, too, arrived. One wrote home, "At Waddesdon, our pupils learned that heroes can be kind." Every morning, the Manor's great kitchen served cinnamon toast and cocoa. Dorothy sat at the head table, putting a hand on each child's shoulder before school, whispering, "We are all together now. Be brave." Then more came. In late 1938, a special transport from Germany brought 30 Jewish boys, ages 9 to 14, fleeing persecution. They arrived with just one suitcase each. As they stepped onto the lawn in the gray light, a maid handed each a mug of warm milk. Dorothy knelt to adjust their coats and said, "You are safe now, as safe as my own children." The boys were given beds with embroidered blankets. They attended a makeshift school in the morning, then played tag between the statues. They called Dorothy Lady and James Mr. Rothschild. For those boys, Waddesdon became a home. One of them later wrote, "Even though I was far from Berlin, here I found a family." The Manor's own boys, the caretaker's sons, played soccer with them on the lawn until dusk. In the evenings, James would sometimes show them his own war medals and pray with them in Hebrew. For the first time, the halls knew children's laughter and the courage of scared little hearts. The Rothschilds continued their work outside the walls too. Waddesdon's cellars were used to store paintings from London's museums, reminders of their belief that art must survive. James advised the government on protecting art and even the empire's precious library manuscripts. Dorothy collected parcels for needy soldiers and refugees. They funded aid shipments to French villages and to Palestine in memory of those who could not get out. As warplanes droned overhead, they lit candles each evening by a prayer book for everyone on both sides of the conflict, a silent wish for peace. In the spring of 1945, the news finally came. The war in Europe was over. Joy swept the Manor. Dorothy ordered the bandstand on the lawn to be set up, and villagers came from miles around. The evacuated children and staff danced to a brass band playing Victory in Europe on the West Terrace. Dorothy and James stood together under a banner reading, "Welcome Home." For the first time since 1939, Waddesdon's lights burned all night in celebration. They had stood strong as fortress, hospital, and home through the darkest times. James, now an old man of 79, looked at Waddesdon with satisfaction. It had served its purpose many times over. He decided to make sure it lived on. When he died in 1957, he left Waddesdon Manor and its collection to the National Trust. Dorothy helped convert parts of the estate into a farm for education, and she always said, "Let the people share this beauty, as we have." In 1959, the manor opened to the public. People walked the same halls where Ferdinand had once led society dances. School classes toured the armory corridor, and art students sketched the Oriental Room. In the first year, the Trust recorded 27,000 visitors. Year after year, that number grew. Dorothy, now in her 60s, often stood by the velvet rope in the hall and quietly greeted each group. It was, she said, their home now. Dorothy lived on, tending Waddesdon's memory until 1988. She continued her work for the newborn state of Israel, visiting Jerusalem, helping build its library and Supreme Court. She remained modest. When reporters called her the Grande Dame of Waddesdon, she laughed and said, "I am just Dorothy, doing what I can." She once funded a hospital for children in her father's name and was always inviting visitors to understand why she loved this place. When she died at 93, a fragment of an era passed with her. The manor would no longer have a private Rothschild home, but by then, it belonged to the world. Waddesdon Manor stands today much as it did in Baron Ferdinand's days. The towers still reach up to the sky. Inside, visitors wander rooms lined with portraits and filled with history. A child might ask, "Who lived here?" The walls have no voice, but the faces in the frames answer. People who loved music and art, who opened their home to strangers in need, who held on to hope through dark times. The gardens bloom with roses each summer, just as they did a century ago. In winter, the great fireplaces still burn, as if welcoming each guest. The legacy of the Rothschilds lives on, not just in stone and treasure, but in every story told here. Ferdinand's passion for beauty is alive in the architecture. Alice's devotion, remembered in the vegetable beds she planted for the war effort. James's bravery and Dorothy's kindness echo in the tales of the children who found safety here. Each year, school groups place small stones at the little memorial by the fountain, the Cedar Boys Memorial, learning that even a house built with golden treasure stood firm on simple love. If you visit Waddesdon Manor now, you will see more than a museum. You will feel a lineage of love and courage. You might stand by the fountain where Ferdinand once strolled and imagine the laughter of his parties. You might touch the oak banisters that sheltered frightened children and remember all who cared for them. Waddesdon reminds us that power and wealth can be used for good. The Rothschilds of Waddesdon showed that even after wars and hardships, generosity and art can shine through. Their legacy lives on in each stone and in every act of kindness. Waddesdon stands today, beautiful and serene, a testament to those who built it and protected it, a reminder that what is made with love and kept with courage will never truly fade away.